Okay, good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 65. That tune was Her Majesty's Jollies, which is a march of the Royal Marine Commandos, and was accompanied by illustrations of Royal Marines from about 1700 up to the present day. Adam, good to see you, mate. How are you going?
Hey, yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, not at all, man. I bugged up the front at the start of the stream because I was muted right at the start. But apart from that, yes, I'm good. We may be joined by Rupert August in a bit. He's stuck on public transport, but he said he's going to try and come on in a little bit.
Painful.
Yeah, I know. Public transport. Tell me about it. How's your week been?
Busy.
Yeah, you've been doing a lot of overtime lately, haven't you?
Yeah, and running people about and all sorts of other stuff.
Oh, so out of the office at least.
Some of it was.
Yeah, well, that was always good. When I had an office job, I always liked something that got me out for a little while.
Yeah.
So, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up, Adam?
Well, I don't want it to be too heavy, but I don't know if you wanted to talk about this situation with the videos of Ukrainians being quite brutal with Russian prisoners.
I was actually talking about that on the Discord only a few hours ago. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just, I mean, I've heard a bunch of takes about it. Obviously, there's a chance this could be fake, but I know that one of the Ukrainian ministers came out and said, what is it? He said something like that he denounced it and it shouldn't be happening, and I kind of thought that was almost like a tacit admission that they'd known it had been going on.
Yeah, is this the video of the Russian POWs have already been captured, being shot in the legs?
Yeah, and stuff of that nature. Yeah.
See, I've heard people have said to me that may be fake, but I don't know. I mean, look, there's so much fake stuff coming out of Ukraine. I mean, the Ukrainians in particular have been caught time after time after time faking things. Even using video games, for God's sake, and saying, "Oh, look at our wonderful horse." But I have heard that might be fake. But one thing that apparently isn't fake, that they definitely were doing, is they were getting hold of the mobile phones of dead Russian soldiers and ringing their wives and mothers and tormenting them. Which, if enemies of ours were doing that to our troops, we would rightly condemn it. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, I know there was a stream we had a while ago where we named you Duke the Chopper over the story of the was it a British soldier taking the ears off of dead Argentinian soldiers?
yeah, but they were dead. They were dead.
Yeah, it is different, but it kind of, because I mean, I've seen a few people say that, well, this is going to make the Russians fight harder because they're not going to
Well,
risk
you're
being
not going to.
captured.
Yeah, you're not going to want to surrender if they're doing that. So yeah, that's true. I mean,
But
that could also, of course, be a reason for faking it. But
yeah, but couldn't it also just as easily cause the Russians to be more likely to retreat in a battle?
no, I don't think it would. I tell you what, I think it might also cause. It might also cause the Russians to do the same thing to the Ukrainians, because that's generally what happens. Is if people commit atrocities on your troops, you will usually reply in kind. I mean, there was a very famous period when the Canadians in Normandy, for example, were in a kind of little private war with the German SS division. And the German SS division started it by shooting Canadian prisoners.
Yeah.
And the Canadians retaliated in kind. When they caught these guys, they didn't take them prisoner, they shot them. And I don't blame them. That's what's more likely to happen, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, since you brought up the SS, I remember there was a particular point in Das Reich, that Max Hastings book, and he points out how this particular SS division had kind of a low opinion of the British because British troops would surrender quite a bit easier than, let's say, Russian troops would on the Eastern Front. But of course, the thing is, like, I mean, obviously, this SS division that fought on the Eastern Front was used to, like, if they got captured by the Russians, some of them would literally be like burnt on a pyre and all sorts of brutal things. So it was a very, very big difference of perspective. And I remember when we were talking about this Argentinian ear chopping thing, someone in the chat was saying that, like, if you looked at like the English Civil War, it was very, very brutal, compared to other wars. But I mean, that's kind of, obviously something like Argentinians and British fighting over the Falklands is not going to inspire the same level of brutality as, let's say, Ukrainians fighting for the defense of their technically their homeland, I suppose.
No, I do get that, but like I said, I think it's a very bad idea on the Ukrainians' part.
Yeah,
because I think it will come back and bite them one way or another. Either it will make the Russians not want to surrender, which is not good from their point of view, but much more likely it will make the Russians retaliate. And particular, if what I hear is happening at the moment is that the Russians are getting more elite troops ready to go back in there. And like they're rearranging a lot of their troops at the moment. And if people like the Russian paras and what have you, who are pretty good, start going in there, those guys are pretty tough and they will definitely retaliate.
Yeah. I mean, like Steve just said that you highlighted, you never want to mistreat POWs. I mean, it is one of those things where if it's like a war in defense of your homeland, you almost want to start treating that Geneva Convention more like a bucket list. But of course, pragmatism is probably on the side of sticking to those rules regardless.
This is Mitch in the chat said that the Russian officers have been showing that video to their troops. So, although, like I said, I have heard that some of that shooting prisoners in the leg stuff was faked, but like I said, it's almost impossible to work out what is really going on in Ukraine. I mean, 90% of the stuff that we can see on the MSM is Ukrainian propaganda of one sort or another. And I include in that the public Western military intelligence guys, because they're not interested in showing what's really going on. They're interested in showing how well Ukraine is doing. And I disregard about 3/4 of it, frankly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I really don't think we have a clear idea of what's going on in Ukraine. I've had people saying to me, for example, that it's now like tomorrow or something is the Ukrainian invasion will have taken longer than the occupation of Iraq. Well, there's two things about that. I mean, first of all, Ukraine is a bigger country than Iraq. And also at the moment is like mostly covered in mud because of the rainy season there. The Ukrainian army is a European army. It's a Western trained army. It was relatively well equipped at the start of the war. And since the war started, it is being flooded with advanced anti-tank and man-pad surface to air missiles. And the Brits and Americans and all the other guys who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan never faced that sort of firepower, ever. The heaviest thing we faced was the odd mortar and some old RPGs.
I mean, I was quite almost disappointed, actually, that I saw some people that had gone out there as volunteers who were themselves veterans, either American or British, and they were like flabbergasted. They were like, "Oh my God, this isn't like Afghanistan. This is a proper army." I'm sitting there thinking, what did you actually expect? That's
they're not bloody tribesmen Taliban or jihadis in Iraq, which I mean, they got better organized eventually, but they were never like a regular military force. And they never had up-to-date modern weapons for the most part.
No, a lot of this old stuff from the Soviets right back in the day.
Yeah, because the Russians, while our men were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, unlike us, were not sending weapons to the Iraqis and the Afghans.
Yeah.
And had they done so, I think we might have been a bit upset, actually. But there we go.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a couple of things because I keep an eye on the headlines, and mainly for a laugh more than anything. And there was a thing where they were talking about that Russian mercenary group, and they were saying, "Oh, they're recruiting cannon fodder to send into Ukraine." And I thought, well, I mean, the Metro newspaper was literally telling people how to sign up and go over as volunteers. I mean, what was that if not rounding up cannon fodder?
Bloody hell, mate! Forces News on YouTube, which is British Forces News, which is funded by the Ministry of Defence, was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
At the start of the war, was basically telling people how to go and join up.
Yeah.
And they had a former British soldier on there who was going to go over. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I saw there was some videos going around. These were kind of hard because again, it's just people talking. You don't know if they're over there or not. Although one of them particularly, there was a particular video of this guy talking about how they were literally being used as cannon fodder, and I think someone on 4chan actually managed to find the local news headline from the small town he was from in America, where it said that he'd gone out there. So there's probably at least a little of something to that. That was pretty bleak.
Yeah.
But it's like some of the other stuff, there's there was news of this supposed Russian sort of drawback or withdrawal, small withdrawal.
Yeah, I saw that around Kiev. They're claiming, aren't they?
Is that actually? Do we know if that's true?
Well, I don't. I see people who believe it, but I mean, I've not seen much evidence of it. Like I watch RT and some other Russian sources using a VPN, of course, because that's the only way you can.
Yeah.
Their stuff on the fighting is like quite moderate. They're not making any huge claims. I don't see them saying that the Russians are sort of just walking over everything. They're not saying that. And so I think I tend to believe the people who make less ambitious claims in a war. If you're claiming you've knocked out 5,000 enemy tanks and however many people they claim to have killed, a lot of the time I think that's bullshit.
Well, I mean, what was this figure they came out with? 15,000.
They're talking about that was right, but that's ridiculous. I think the real figure is about 1,500.
Well, because BBC Russia, I'm not sure if you saw this. BBC Russia did a report where they went through local news headlines from all the little provinces in Russia and tried to find like all the individual stories of like families who'd lost loved ones. and put that together to come up with a sort of, and this was like a week and a half ago maybe, but they came up with the figure of, I think it was 600 to 700.
Yep. Yeah. I like I said, I've heard figures of like the Russians might have lost 1,500 dead. But you got to remember, this is like Iraq and Afghanistan were low intensity counterinsurgency wars. This is a medium intensity war, and like if our leaders get things wrong and it does turn into World War III, even conventional fighting would see more than 1,500 guys getting killed every single day. Just conventional fighting. So this is a medium intensity conflict, and yeah, they might have lost 1,500 in a month fighting an organized army. I mean, the other thing people forget is the Ukrainian army is about the same size as the British army.
Yeah, it's a fair size.
Yeah, it's not a tiny little force. I mean, or it is a tiny little force, but it's not infinitesimal. You know, 80,000 guys can put up a reasonable fight if they're organized and well trained. And as I said, the Ukrainian army prior to the war was trained by British soldiers, American soldiers, all went over there and gave training to the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
I mean, officially as well, that was done on purpose. I mean, this is why Putin eventually thought, no, this is going, like, these guys are going to join NATO, etc., which is what's caused the whole fucking thing in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like Putin because
I'm not a Putin shill. I'm not a Putin shill.
He's funded, you know, the Russian establishment specifically has funded, you know, green activism in the UK to sort of keep Europe generally dependent on Russian gas. You know, they funded the you know, the sort of anti-nuclear movement.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've had America funding it from the other side for a completely different reason. So
yeah. JB is saying RT is rotting your brains, kids. No, it's not. RT is actually much more balanced than the Bias Brainwashing Corporation. Trust me.
Well, GB said, how have they lost 1,500 people but 2,200? Well, this is the thing. Whether you take the low number or the high number, the losses when you compare it to equipment losses doesn't make much sense.
Oh, look. A guy got me to look at an article last week that he's put up. And he had worked out the Russian losses on the basis of the vehicles. But what he was doing was he was counting the Russians have supposedly lost 278 tanks. Now, we don't know that, of course. But and if they have, that's more tanks than the British Army has. The British Army has less than 250 tanks, by the way. But if they have lost 278 tanks, and Russian tanks only have 3 crew rather than 4 because they use an automatic loader. But what he did was he for every tank he said, "Oh, that's 3 dead Russians." But you can knock out a tank without killing all the crew, and you can knock out a tank without killing any of the crew sometimes. So
but most of the time, you're going to have at least a few deaths per vehicle.
I wouldn't even say that. Look, it's perfectly possible. You see, even knocking out a tank or an armored vehicle is an up in the air thing because very often they can be salvaged and repaired. Yeah. So, you know, like it used to happen all the time in World War II. There'd be a battle and a load of tanks would get knocked out. Both sides would repair loads of those tanks. Yeah. And that can still happen. Now, all right, if you get hit by a main tank round or a big missile, you're probably not going to be able to repair the tank. And you might kill all the crew, but you won't necessarily do that. For one thing, tanks these days have quite a lot of active defense measures and what have you. And there was one British tank knocked out in Iraq by the enemy. And how it got knocked out was it was crossing a steep obstacle. And some bloody jihadi guy fired an RPG into the relatively thin belly plates of the tank. And it blew off the foot and part of the lower leg of the driver. Now, that tank was absolutely knocked out. The other 3 guys in the tank were totally unhurt. The driver didn't die, although he lost his leg, obviously. But the tank was knocked out, although later on it was repaired. That was the only British tank that was knocked out in Iraq by the enemy. The only tank that was destroyed in Iraq, British tank, was destroyed by another British Challenger in a blue-on-blue incident. And that did kill or wound all the crew. Didn't kill all of them. I think it killed 2 or 3 of them. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But they were all either killed or wounded. So you can't say, okay, every tank knocked out is 3 blokes dead. That's just nonsense. Just as you can't say every truck knocked out is 1 bloke dead.
Yeah.
Because it's perfectly possible for the truck to stop and the bloke to get out, And also, the other thing that people don't seem to get is that in every war, always, and it's never going to change, the vast majority of the casualties are infantry. Always. Because the only people who can actually hold ground are infantry. Tanks can't hold ground, nor can artillery, nor can drones, nor can helicopters. Only infantry can hold ground. And obviously, you can only partially armor the human body against even very small caliber small arms and tiny bits of shrapnel. You can't fully armor the human even against those things. And anything bigger is going to go through any armor he can carry. So that's why always infantry are most of the casualties. And I guarantee you, when eventually the truth about this war comes out, you will find that most of the casualties on both sides are not tankers, they're infantrymen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also looked to me like a lot of the Russian tanks that were supposedly knocked out weren't knocked out, they were abandoned. Now, I don't know why that happened. They ran out of fuel, presumably, something of that nature. But it didn't look. There's quite a lot of vehicles who don't seem to be very extensively damaged that are supposedly knocked out.
Yeah, I've seen other vehicles abandoned. Are they actually abandoning tanks as well?
Well, I have seen videos of like about 4 or 5 supposedly Russian tanks that are abandoned. The other problem you got in this war, of course, is that both sides are using Soviet equipment. So it's quite difficult to work out if one tank is Ukrainian or if it's Russian.
Yeah, definitely. I did notice. I mean, again, it's hard to tell. I did notice that there was a lot of older equipment in the Russian stock compared to the Ukrainian stock.
Yeah.
But I know that there's been like McCain was photographed back in like 2014 in Ukraine. So they've had some outside assistance, I suppose, in financing their military upgrades.
John McNamara is saying, I've heard that the Russian-Syrian war vets were sloppy as they were used to moving convoys around in the desert without ambushes. Maybe. And they certainly wouldn't have been used to facing really modern anti-tank missiles. Even something like the N-law, which in the British Army was called the MBT law, that thing is not a simple anti-tank thing like a bazooka. It's a top attack missile. You can set it to attack the top of the turret. And one of the things that does seem to happen to the Russian tanks, because of their autoloaders, and their autoloaders are full of rounds, is if it does get a hit from a top attack missile, the rounds in the autoloader go off and the turret goes off. And that will kill all the crew.
Isn't that why the old Shermans were called Ronsons?
They were supposedly called that. I don't think they really were. I think the Germans called them. I think the Germans called them Tommy Cougars because they first faced them with the British using them in the desert. But on the other hand, that's been a bit exaggerated, even to be honest. But yeah, I have seen quite a lot of evidence that the Russian autoloaders are working against them. Because, there have been people saying for years that Western tanks should have autoloaders, but to have an autoloader means you've got to have, say, 20, 30 rounds in that autoloader high up in the turret, which is not a good plan if you get hit by a missile high in the turret, because the rounds in the autoloader are going to go off, and that's going to brew the tank up and probably blow the turret off and kill everyone in it. So, yeah, I don't know. Have I ever been caught in a vehicle ambush? No, mate, never ever. But fortunately, I wouldn't want to be either, to be honest. But Yeah, I don't know. I think we're not going to know the truth about the war in the Ukraine for quite a long time. Certainly, it's going to take, say, 6 months or so before we can even start to get some of the truth out. I basically, like I said, I discount 3/4 of the stuff I see on the MSN because it's mostly just Ukrainian propaganda.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is so hard to work out one side or the other what is going on.
Yeah, because there's so much. I mean, all right, all sides do propaganda in war, of course they do, but it's just that the Western media just takes everything Ukraine says at face value.
Mm.
They never have the slightest doubt that everything coming out of the Ukrainian side is true, which
Yeah.
is a ridiculous way to carry on, frankly.
I saw that guy. Is it Strelkov? Igor Strelkov.
Mm.
He's I mean, he's actually a wanted war criminal, but he was posting and some of the posts got made onto Telegram. He was quite critical about the Russian sort of invasion, how it had been handled. He said like the siege of Kharkiv was completely mishandled, and they were essentially trying to push into the city when it hadn't been completely besieged, and the Ukrainians were still getting reinforcements in there.
Mm.
Yeah, he was quite critical. So I think Russia's going to have to walk away from this and learn a few lessons.
Yeah. JB in the chat, Russia killed hundreds of their own spec ops, which are called SF, but anyway, their own spec ops trying to take Kiev, which he spells in a Ukrainian way, airport, and now they've abandoned it. Sad. There's no way Russia lost hundreds of guys in that airport. In fact, I've seen video of the Russians occupying, and there wasn't one dead body anywhere.
But I am quite surprised that the Russians have seemed to have pulled back in areas and just given up ground that they had quite successfully.
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't know what Putin's plan was, but what I always suspected it was to take over either all or large parts of eastern Ukraine, and then have western Ukraine as some sort of militarily neutralized buffer zone.
Mm.
All right, JB, it's called a rout. Yeah, all right, mate. You're just talking shit, man. Sorry. You're just talking shit. Yeah, and paras aren't. John Best in the chat says paras aren't spec ops. They're not spec ops. They're SF, special forces. Sake, who calls them spec ops for God's sake?
Yeah, McNamara said apparently Russians are receiving mass text messages from the US asking them about the conflict. The US are claiming that the Russians are trying to play the conflict down domestically. Well, I've heard that they don't allow them to call it an invasion on the news.
It's a special operation, I believe, is what they call it.
Yeah.
I mean, how often have we fought various wars in the West that we don't call wars? You know.
Yeah.
Quite often. I was just going to say, someone's just mentioned your avatar is incredible. I was going to say, of course, that's a Sherman by the looks of it.
Yeah.
But it's a Thomas the Tank Engine Sherman.
Yeah, it's a shame it isn't something like a Churchill, but I took what I could get.
Yep. Fair enough. Dear. Yeah, I don't know. Special is the same way the Special Olympics are special. Yeah, right.
Do we know what's happening with this gas as well? Because I mean, from the reports I've seen, they've said that the deadline to pay in rubles has come and gone. No one's paid in rubles, and the Russians haven't cut it off yet.
Really?
Is this true? Do we know?
I don't know. I don't know. I have seen that the Russians are making moves to put the ruble back on the gold standard. They haven't done that yet, but they're moving in that direction by the looks of it.
Yeah, they've tied it back to gold, but it's a tiny amount. It's a start, I suppose.
Yeah, it is, and what it will do is it will encourage Russians to invest in gold rather than investing in foreign currencies, which is of course why they've done it. And the ruble is, by the way, after the sanctions, the ruble tumbled, but it's now back up to where it was before the start of the fighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've actually succeeded in stabilizing the currency at the same level it was before the invasion and before all of senile Biden sanctions, which are probably going to hurt the West more than they're going to hurt Russia. But
It does seem that way. I mean, there was that Stone Toss comic. I'm not sure if you saw it, and it's got the American guy at the gas pump filling up his car, and he's looking on his phone, and it says something sanctions on Russia, and he's just like Russia, as it's got like the board on the fuel prices behind him.
Yeah. I saw Korea. Someone in the chat is saying, what did I see? I think Cardamom in the chat saying they should have copied the Irish to describe the Ukrainian war as an emergency. The British called their war in Malaya an emergency. The Korean War was called a police action. The countries have done this forever. Certainly in the 20th century, it's been going on for a very long time. The Falklands wasn't a war; it was a conflict.
Yeah, it's much more Chad if you actually just call it an invasion, to be honest.
Yeah. But no, it's a special operation. Well, I mean, okay, all countries do this. It's not just the Russians. What, JB? It's back up because they banned selling and forced buying. It's still as weak as ever. No, it's not, JB. JB, I don't know what sort of state you really think Western economies are in. I don't know what sort of state you think they're in. Have you looked at the inflation rates in UK and in America? And where they're going, not where they are now, where they're going. One of the things I want to talk about on this stream is I reckon that we are in for 20% inflation, and much sooner than people think. And when I say we, I mean Britain, America, and most of the West.
Yeah, I mean, I know this was coming out of the lockdowns. I mean, those guys that AA doesn't like, that he calls the Tory boys. There was a bit of a clash between them and other people. They were saying that, oh, look, the economy was looking for a strong recovery. And for a while, I really hope that had been true. I think we're starting to see some major cracks, though, although some of this has been a lot longer coming than just during lockdown. I mean, it is generally a problem that we largely just got rid of all our manufacturing for a service-based economy. And the problem is when you're a service-based economy, you still need those manufactured goods. And you don't have the leeway over the global economy to do what we've been doing, which is running around telling everyone they've got to hire black HR, whatever's.
Yeah. Indeed.
And they've got to have, LGBT this and Pride March that, that you end up with an economy that exists purely on the backing of military force, which these countries have now sussed that we're not brave enough to actually go through on. So,
and they're not big enough these days. I mean, I don't know if you've been following what's going on in America, but in America there is an absolute war between the Department of State, which is, for anyone listening, the American version of the Foreign Office, if you like, which is full of neocon morons, and they're the people who keep doing gaffes with, I say gaffes, they're doing it on purpose, with senile Biden, of saying, oh, Putin's got to go and he's got to be removed and someone should assassinate him and all this kind of shit, that's coming out of the American Department of State. On the other hand, you've got the DOD, the Department of Defense, where the military guys who are much more realistic are turning around and saying, no, look, guys, we cannot afford a war in Europe right now because the real enemy of America is China.
Yeah.
We can't, the Americans literally cannot fight a war in Europe at the moment. If they did, the Chinese will just laugh.
Well, I mean, we've seen. I mean, pivoting from this Ukraine thing to a similar thing with China. I mean, there's this situation with the Solomon Islands. I don't probably know as much about them as you do, but
well, they used to be in the Australian sphere of influence. They ain't anymore.
Well, yeah. Didn't I see one of their their leader come out recently and say that they wouldn't be accepting Chinese military bases on the Solomon Islands, or is that still going to go ahead?
Well, they said that, but I mean, how are they going to stop them?
Well, yeah, sure.
I would be surprised if the Solomon Islands military consists of 300 guys. It's like,
And of
And
course, that's the Ukraine situation, but flipped, isn't it? Because that's that's China being like the West is in Ukraine, wanting to take it into China's sphere of influence when it sits on the border of a Western in inverted commas, in quotes, country, which is obviously Australia, and of course it sits on various major shipping lanes.
well, the Solomon Islands is like a long way from China, to be fair.
Yeah,
And even Australia is quite a long way from China, although not long enough to be out of range of their missiles. Parts of it, anyway. But the real enemy of America is China, not Russia. I mean, pushing Russia into the arms of China, which is what has been going on now for some years, is the most insane global strategic thinking you've ever heard of. If you support the guy, if you support global homo, which I don't, but I mean, if you want global homo to carry on, then it was an insane thing to do, and obviously insane. So
I'm just getting on Google Maps. Yeah, like the Solomon Islands would literally put the Chinese Navy. It would give them, a vastly extended range over.
yeah, it's China it's China pushing into us, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And China's been doing that in the South China Sea. They've even created artificial islands, which they've turned into absolute fortresses.
Yeah, funny enough, this was actually something a long time ago when I was doing some very light academic work. This was something I kept talking about, was that we should build sort of artificial naval base islands in the South Atlantic.
Well, we don't even need to do that because most of the islands in the South Atlantic are British anyway.
Yeah, I was talking about a way in which you could bridge between those islands around, the sort of Western Africa and reconnect it with us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well,
But,
I mean, there's airports on a lot of them these days.
Yeah, it was a bit pie in the sky. I was mostly mucking about, but the Chinese have gone and done it. So.
No, the Chinese have been doing that in the South China Sea for quite a long time now.
Yeah,
and the Chinese Navy has more warships than the American Navy does.
Yeah.
They don't have as many aircraft carriers, although they're building new aircraft carriers, which are much larger than the ones they have at the moment. They don't have the ability at the moment to operate in strength anywhere around the world, which the US Navy and even the Royal Navy can do because of their supply ships, etc. The Chinese don't have those yet. But that's not going to take them that long.
Yeah.
So, and also, I've seen people speculating that if the ruble did manage to get back on the gold standard, which would be an enormous blow against the US dollar, and the Chinese followed suit, which they easily could, like that's kind of earth-changing stuff if it was to happen.
Would that, maybe I'm being a bit over the top, would that spell the end of the American economy?
I don't know, man. I think a lot of Americans I speak to mean it would cause war. A lot of Americans I've spoken to, and they're not stupid people.
But who would they fight, though? That's the thing.
China and Russia. These guys actually are saying that that's one thing that could cause America to fight a nuclear war. Because if that were to happen, and the dollar were to drop from being the currency, the reserve currency of choice all around the world, that's America on the quite quick downslope.
Yeah.
Because America, although they're not as bad as Britain, they're in a similar position, and a lot of their industry has been outsourced to China. I mean, which obviously doesn't make it very strong. And this is why I'm talking about this inflation stuff. I mean, we've had that going on for years, as you said, Arman. We've had 2 years when what little economy we do have has been like half shut down because of what amounts to a bad flu. We've had money printing in all countries, but especially America, like it's going out of fashion. So the money supply is enormous these days. You've had the public and private debt in all Western countries, but again, especially America, is enormous. And then, of course, there's the shooting ourselves in the foot with all the watermelon green crap that we're going on about, and not producing energy that we could be producing. And again, particularly in the case of America, but also true to some degree in Britain. All of this stuff combined, and then these ridiculous fucking sanctions, which I think are going to hurt our people worse than they're going to hurt the Russians in the end. I could easily see Western nations like America and Britain having 20% inflation, and much more quickly than people think.
Yeah.
And that could actually change all bets, because that's enough to wipe out most average middle class people's savings very quickly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that would be a good thing, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a time of big hardship, but that actually is something that could bring down, certainly in some nations, it could bring down the globo homo stuff. It really could. It might lead to a sudden injection of common sense into a lot of Western nations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 555 in chat. I mean, Jobu said it's Cold War 2.0, boys. Yeah, and we're on the losing side this time.
Yeah.
But 555 in chat says Cold War 2.0 might not be as bad if it forces us to drop windmills and solar panels for energy and slap us back to reality away from global homo. I saw, was it Ian Duncan Smith tweeting about how essentially we would have been able to put a lot more force on Russia if we hadn't pursued the green agenda. And for a moment, I thought we were going to see a wave of sort of neocons doing at least something decent for a change and sort of push back against a lot of this stuff. But he's been the only one, sadly.
Yeah.
I was hoping we might have at least some sort of fierce Tory might stand up and sort of, curate the war footing into something useful. But we haven't seen that, sadly, as of yet. I'm kind of hoping we do. I kind of hope we'll see some sort of return of sort of European Bonapartism.
Yeah, maybe something. Anything would be better than what we've got at the moment, which is just suicidal. The course we're on at the moment is suicidal. Gary Garner's Goy Pride. My son is not in the army. He would be very, very insulted if he said that. He's in the Royal Navy. But there we go. John McNamara says, Marco Calais Begay, hey up, mate. Hey, mate, up Sinn Féin. Yeah, right up them with a bayonet. I don't know. I think that we're in a much weaker position than people think. Someone said to me last week about this new Iron Curtain. And as Jobu's been saying, and 555, the difference is this time we're the ones pulling the Iron Curtain down, and as Jobu said, our manufacturing's on the other side of it. It's a bit very, very dodgy, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember you used to have these retarded arguments with people where I would sort of justify the idea of a collapse or even a civil war along the lines that it's kind of better to get that stuff out of the way now, because the further down society goes, the worse that stuff will be. But now we're sort of facing down the barrel. Now I'm sort of chickening out.
Yeah, well, look. I mean, it's not going to make any difference what any of us think about this. What's going to happen is going to happen. But one of the things I have been seeing a lot of talk of lately, and increasingly so, is food shortages. Have you noticed this, Adam?
I've seen a lot of people talking about it. I've seen nothing as of yet, but they are definitely getting more expensive.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, like supermarket brand olive oil nearly doubled in price last week.
Yeah,
down here.
Yeah,
nearly. It went up. It was $3, and it went up to what did it go? 180, I think. $1.80.
I know. Truck movement is literally at a third of what it was sort of 2 weeks ago.
And I'm seeing even channels which are basically like YouTube channels, which are really investment and financial advice channels. Even those people are starting to tell people to get reserved stocks of food in.
Yeah.
Like stuff that won't go off.
Well, yeah, like funny enough, I mean, I always used to get laughed at for being a bit of a mini prepper. I've got a couple of boxes in the garage with some water and tinned foods and stuff like that. And I mean, I always used to say to them, it's not that I think the world's going to end or society's going to collapse. It's that your roof might spring a massive leak and you might have to leave the house, and you don't know what sort of accommodation you're going to end up in. But yeah, those people aren't laughing as much now. So
No,
I mean,
and I mean
they're
even the American president has talked about upcoming food shortages.
yeah, it's looking pretty bleak.
Which certainly won't affect him, of course, or any of the elites, but it will affect ordinary people. And I mean, we all saw at the start of the China virus nonsense what panic buying will do. So the first time there is some real stuff coming through about a food shortage in a particular city or town or wherever, you don't know, damn well the shelves are just going to be stripped bare in like a day. And as I understand it, because we use this just-in-time system these days, like the supermarkets themselves don't carry a great deal of extra stock, and even the central warehouses for the supermarkets don't have a lot of stock.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be where you're an expert, because I know you work in the transport industry.
Well, I mean, like Sainsbury's flagship store in the UK is Bybrook in Ashford in Kent. I used to work not far from there, actually, and that they basically have no warehouse section. There's like an unloading bay at the side, and then there's like a very small sort of rear area, and then it's all store.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But if you go to, let's say, an older store, like I think there's an Asda store in Canterbury, and that has a fair sized warehouse at the back of it by comparison to, because it's older.
Yeah, I worked in a supermarket in the 1980s, like just outside London, and the warehouse there was huge, and like there was probably, you could have stocked the shelves 4 times from the warehouse of that one store. But I don't think they do that anymore at all, do they?
No, they don't. Yeah, I mean, I suppose the one positive about that is it'll really, I mean, like I always kind of think that one of the reasons they've been able to sort of get people to accept a lot of the social changes that have happened is because it was kind of sold to them that these social changes would allow them to sort of live in a society of plenty. And now they're going to I think people are probably going to realize over the next sort of 10 years that the social changes were going to happen anyway. These people are going to force them on you, and it literally had no benefit to people in any sort of meaningful consumerist way. And I mean, sadly, that will be the thing that pushes people over the top. Not the rape gangs or the mass immigration or anything like that. It'll be expensive food and not being able to fill up their car.
Well, I mean, I was talking about this on a Discord last week, and if a child is going to get really upset going one day with nothing to eat.
Yeah,
any child, like certainly up to being a teenager. And they're not going to like it. A woman is going to start moaning big time after 2 days without anything to eat. And most men, in fact, all men, are going to be very unhappy if they go 3 days with nothing to eat. So,
then you're going to see how effective the sort of consolidation of power in the sort of media and the various other apparatus has been, because you're probably still going to see people even at that point playing rearguard defense for the establishment's war on this foreign power, to which none of these people have ever even been to, or half of them probably couldn't even point out on a map all that easily.
Hang on, I'm just trying to watch something here. Gary Garner's Gay Pride. I've banned you before, Matt, and I'll do it again soon. But anyway, we were talking about this on the Discord the other week, and I reckon if there was a serious supply problem in a city, that place is going to turn into an absolute hellhole really quickly.
Yeah, but I mean they're all full of minorities anyway, so
yeah, exactly, which will make it even worse, of course. But what I'm trying to say is that if you actually if you can imagine somewhere like London or Manchester or Birmingham mostly running out of food, that that's going to become unimaginable. And anyone who thinks the cops are going to come and help them ain't been watching the news for the last few years. So it's really, I don't know. And I get worried when I hear everyone from the US president, senile old shitbag that he is, downwards turning around and saying we're going to have food shortages. I don't know. Like I said, I mean, I'm like you. I've always had like a month's worth of food in my place. I even have like huge, great tins of dog food now for my little dog, which he doesn't normally eat. He normally has more expensive stuff than that. But they're just reserve stuff if I can't get it.
Yeah. I mean, my big thing was I wanted to get a little homestead. I've got a few vegetable patches and that sort of thing. But I wanted to get the whole shebang. But I don't know. I'm kind of thinking I'm increasingly running out of time.
Oh, it'd be good to have. I mean, I was saying to a bloke, I know guys who've got like young families and stuff, and like if I had a young family, a wife and kids and stuff to worry about, and I lived in a city, and food ran out for say a week, if at the end of that week things did not look like they were going to improve, I would pack as many supplies as I could into my car and just piss off to any relative or friend who would have me in the countryside somewhere. Because you're going to end up getting people who will kill you for what you have.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, maybe this is going to be another black swan event for the right, and maybe it'll be another instance where we should have been a bit more organised and a bit more ready, and it's going to pass us by. But I mean, this is where your sort of focused, organised local areas would come in handy, where you can sort of push back against this stuff. When I mean, I'm probably going a bit ahead of the current situation. This is probably not going to happen for quite a while, but I always think of in that I forget the name of the book, the People's Tragedy, a book on the Russian Revolution. He talks about how like they literally had trains derailing coming out of the city because they had so many people hanging off of them because they were all trying to get away from the cities and get out into the countryside because it was just turned into an absolute hellhole. And that's something that we're going to have to sort of watch out for quite a way away, admittedly. I imagine that is something that
can you tell though? Can you tell, Harman? I mean, I reckon this sort of stuff, because of this just-in-time system that we have, this sort of thing could happen really quite suddenly.
Yeah, it could, but there's a lot of man with van out there that can move stuff around in an emergency if needed.
Well, if there's enough stuff to move around in the first place, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve in the chat says, expecting of a migrant wave when the Mideast starts getting hungry. Now, what I do know is that between them, Russia and Ukraine produce about 30% of the world's wheat, I believe. And a lot of that wheat goes to places like Egypt, where like they don't have, like they're on the margin. Like it wouldn't be too difficult to tip most poor Egyptians into absolute poverty and not being able to buy enough food. And the war has already pushed the price of wheat up considerably. And there are other areas around that part of the world which also rely on Russian and Ukrainian wheat.
Some of those places, get like 80% of their grain from Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. And as Steve says in the chat here, if you get famines in those places, it's going to push another great wave of migrants into Europe. Another reason why the sanctions are just so fucking stupid,
Yeah.
But I mean, of course, Joe Biden doesn't care if a great big massive wave of Middle Eastern migrants come into Europe. He doesn't care at all.
I don't even think he cared if they go to America.
No, I don't think he would either.
Just more Democrat voters. I saw something the other day where they said that the amount of immigration into the US since Biden took over has actually changed voting blocks because of the demographic shift. And I mean, people used to rail against Trump, right? And I'm not going to swing into his defense too heavily, but he did half legal immigration and even legal immigration and even illegal immigration. He was sort of keeping it down at a nice paltry 40,000 a month, which sounds obviously pathetic, but then under Biden it's now sitting at like 160,000 a month.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
As you say, it's just going to change whole areas. And also, as I understand it, those immigrants, once they get into America, are being deliberately sent to various places by the Democrats, so they can do that. They can change the voting of that area.
Yeah.
So I don't know. 555 in the chat. Australia has about 1 week's petrol supply. That would sound about right. I can well believe that. No Name in the chat says, been stocking tins, dry food, etc. since February 2020. Been growing food since the summer of 2020. It's also obvious this nonsense is coming. Get cracking, people. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think if you don't now have like at least say a month's supply of stuff that's not going to go off quickly, you're pretty stupid these days, to be honest. And like, people have said, well, having a load of food might make you more vulnerable to people attacking you. Well, maybe, but on the other hand, having food's always better than not having it. Trust me. I mean, I've gone, how long? I've probably gone 3, maybe 4 days without eating. It ain't pleasant, guys. Not a good plan. Trust me. So yeah, I do think that is something else that we should be looking out for. And if you get food shortages combined with like 20% inflation, and energy costs are absolutely going to go through the roof. I mean, that's entirely obvious to everybody now. And there's what really gets me is, even though this is obviously going to happen, our political guys won't do anything to reverse this watermelon green bollocks that they're doing, which is causing half of it. No, they're just not interested in it. Like because they're committed to this great reset shit.
I mean, they're actually. I think there was people from the Labour Party recently, and of course there was no pushback to this from the Tories, but they were talking about bringing in an end date of when you'd be able to, from which they'd ban the sale of sort of grown meat, and you just have meat substitute. Which, I mean, it's like the bugs thing, right? We can all sit here and be disgusted at the bugs, but if you actually go and look at the price of those things, they are prohibitively expensive. The idea that you're going to sustain any amount of people on fake meat and bugs is absurd.
Yeah, it's really nonsense.
Chopu said, "I'll be riding that Trump train in 2024." No, absolutely not. No, I mean, he was never that great, and I think he's actually gotten worse. he's just turned into sort of a very rotten boomercon even since he got out.
Is he really even gonna run in 2024? I mean, how old will he be by then?
He will be old. I don't know exactly how old he'll be. I think he'll be a little bit older than a touch older than Biden was when he ran in.
Yeah, but he's not as gaga as Biden, so there's that.
To be honest, I think he's sounding a bit nuts lately. He said some pretty ridiculous things. Yeah, Job said he's running. Oh God, the thing is, he's just gonna absorb. I mean, I say absorb the energy from another half decent candidate. Is there another decent candidate? I mean, I do quite like this Ron DeSantis guy, but he's not the guy. He's one step in the right direction, the same way that Trump was one measly step in the right direction. Trump had his moment. He's gone. He should just, that should be it.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really followed who's going to run for the Americans on the Republican side in 2024. I've rapidly come to the conclusion that it doesn't make a lot of difference really who is the president of the US or to some degree the prime minister of the UK.
Yeah.
It's almost always a choice of crabheads, basically. I mean, I don't like Alexander Johnson at all, as everyone knows who's ever listened to anything I said. But I don't know. I mean, would Trump be better than Biden? Well, I can't think anyone would be worse than Biden. But I mean, that ain't saying much.
It's the thing is, at that point. I mean, there was a mold bug blog that he put out on his Grey Mirror blog. I think the day that Trump lost the election, and he kind of vaguely said that this is actually probably it might have been a week before actually, but he basically said that it would be a good thing Trump losing because you're robbing the left of an enemy and the energy that they get from that. And I mean, you can see this now. They're really, I mean, it doesn't seem to matter because they've consolidated the power so well, but they they trip over themselves to constantly play rear guard defense for the establishment because the establishment is now in its entirety all their guys, and they have to sort of live on those mistakes. So he said that, and I think that was one of the things that he said that's actually sort of has lasted the test of time.
And the civil service, who don't change when the government changes, they're all globo homo liberal lefties. That's also the problem, and that's true in the UK and the USA, etc., and Australia. So I don't know. Jobu says all these Trump deniers can't point to a remotely acceptable replacement. I don't think you're wrong about that,
No.
Jobu. I don't think you're wrong about that. There's a poverty of decent Republicans. There really is. So, yeah, I don't think anyone's going to argue about that. Carterman's saying at least Trump won't be as old as Churchill during his second premiership in the 1950s. I am not a big Winston Churchill fan. Anyone who's listened to these streams for a while now will know that. I'm not a big Winston Churchill fan. And I will tell you what, I will recommend a stream that Radlib did, Radical Liberation, did with Horace, which was looking at the book The Unnecessary War by Buchanan. And it was actually a bloody good stream. I didn't agree with all of it, but I agreed with most of it for sure.
Yeah, because I saw you posted the audiobook up for that. Is that because I've read Hitchens' Phony Victory, and I wasn't sure if it was also worth reading the Buchanan book as well.
Yeah, no, it is. I haven't read it, but I listened to the audiobook, and I am actually thinking of getting Horace on a stream to do a stream about that. But I don't know how to get hold of him at the moment. But I wouldn't mind doing a stream of Horace on the Unnecessary War, because I think it is a pretty damn good book. And it also points out that one of the major things that destroyed the British Empire in World War II was America. So,
yeah.
And Buchanan was an American, so good on him for writing that. But there's a lot of good stuff in it. I mean, he talks about the nonsense of UK ditching the alliance with Japan in the 1920s because the Americans wanted us to, but not getting an alliance from the Americans in return.
Yeah.
We should just have told them to get fucked. No, we're going to keep the Japanese alliance, thank you. But yeah, Carterman, I don't think Buchanan's book is terrible at all. It's mostly very good. It's in several sections, so there's quite a lot about the First World War, and I agreed with nearly all of that. We did a stream, Adam was on it, looking at a British book that was looking at the outbreak of the First World War and the various mistakes the Brits made. And Buchanan gets most of that right. He's then got a long section on the rise of the Nazis and what was going, and also the Washington Naval Treaty and all sorts of other stuff that was going on in the 1920s and 30s. To me, he made a good case that Hitler wasn't really a threat to Britain. Like, Hitler always wanted to go east. He never really had a great intention of taking over France, let alone Britain. And I think we pushed him into that position because we gave this guarantee to Poland. And it's ridiculous to give another nation the ability to send you to war. It's a ridiculous thing to do.
Which is a mistake we've made a few times.
Well, that's one of the few times that we have done that.
Yeah, but it's not the only time.
It was one of the major ones, to be fair.
Yeah.
And this was a military dictatorship. These days everyone talks about brave little Poland and blah and blah and blah, but actually it was a military dictatorship.
Based.
I'm not saying whether military dictatorships are good or not. It wasn't a democracy, is what I'm trying to say.
No.
It wasn't a brave little.
Well, I mean, they're doing this with plucky Ukraine right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The bastion of liberal democracy, as they seem to believe it is now.
Yeah, which even the United Nations said was probably the most corrupt nation in Europe. even more corrupt than Russia.
Yeah.
But that's all right. I mean, and they've got their neo-Nazi guys like the Azov Battalion and all the rest of it. But those neo-Nazis are all out because they're globo homos neo-Nazis. So
even though they were, I mean, the guy that they were inspired from was literally seen as too thuggish even for the actual Nazis.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me at all.
But yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, I remember watching the old streams between Brutus and Horus back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was even on one of them at one point, and yeah, I don't know. I think as time's gone by, I kind of see Horus's perspective on this a bit more.
Also, he's changed a bit. Like he used to be pretty heavily third position, and I think he's less so now.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember back in the day. I think I remember him saying I think that might have been in Brutus's Telegram that he was like reading, Rothbard and Mises, and I think he's moved a little bit right economically since then. Which I'm not. I mean, I'm not a libertarian, so I'm not really that bothered either way. In fact, I'd probably say that I'm a little bit of a third positionist at times, a third positionist, but yeah, like I mean, it is an issue when you look at it that Germany ends up in a situation where if it wants to go east, it's now got an aggressive France at its back, and of course us as well, and it's got to try and secure that first.
I mean, the other thing was there was a chance that the Poles would, because the Poles were offered to be allies with the Germans. Okay. And there was a chance that the main problem was Danzig and the corridor to get to Danzig. And without that British guarantee, Poland might have negotiated with Germany and come to a deal. But as soon as they got the British guarantee, which the French felt they also had to do, they were never going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, this was actually, who was it who compared that situation to Ukraine now? Was it Mersheimer?
Yeah, actually, it might be. Yeah, he's quite good. I quite like that guy.
Yeah, or it was someone like that anyway. They said that essentially as soon as you give a country like Poland in World War II or Ukraine now this sort of backing of this large empire, you're going to make them quite bullshit. You're going to make them very aggressive.
Yeah, they're not going to negotiate. And of course, the West, in Ukraine's case, the West is very happy to fight to the last Ukrainian woman and child. We're not sending our people there, but they can. Yeah, they can fight to the last woman and child.
Yeah, McNamara said, what about the famed Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact? I don't know enough about this.
That came about after the Poles had rejected going into a pact with Germany.
But, I mean, he said this was agreed before the invasion?
It was, but it was after. But the Germans were offering the Poles an alliance because the Poles were very anti-Soviet, obviously. They were offering them an alliance in the same way that they did Romania and Hungary and all these other nations, in the Balkans and what have you. They were offering them an alliance prior to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. And they only did the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact after that. After it was only when Britain and France were going to guarantee Poland that Hitler thought, well, fuck that.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that Hitler was a good guy, because he wasn't. And I wouldn't have cared, quite frankly, if the last SS Panzer Grenadier had fought the last Red Guards Army guy somewhere up around Vladivostok. It wouldn't have worried me at all if they'd have all killed each other. I'm looking at it from a British point of view.
Yeah.
And a Western European point of view.
Yeah. Pan-Europeanism.
Cardamon, I don't think Buchanan really cared for the British Empire. He's made anti-British statements in the past. Well, look, I've made anti-British statements quite frequently, but they weren't about the time of the British Empire. And if you read The Unnecessary War, he's actually quite complimentary about it. Even look at the title of the damn book.
I mean, that's always been a problem with the Yanks, isn't it? At the end of the day, is you always get this strain of anti-British resentment, whether it's from the paleocon side like Buchanan, or whether it's from the sort of neocon side.
I think Buchanan is more critical of modern day Brits and Churchill, which I don't mind because I don't like Churchill. I think Churchill made enormous mistakes. I don't agree with Forrest, who says Churchill was not all that intelligent. I don't agree with that. That was one
Oh
thing.
yeah, he's really hard on him. He's like,
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Yeah.
basically, you know, well, what is it? He says he's like he's nothing but a a drunkard. He pissing himself and slurring his words all the time and blah blah blah. And it's like there was certainly an element to which he liked his drink. I think some of that's a
Yes.
little bit heading into sort of caricature territory.
Well, yeah, but also the other thing that Churchill did was he wouldn't get up until like 10 o'clock in the morning unless there was an emergency, and then he would go and have a nap after lunch, and then he would keep all his advisors and generals and what have you up until like 4 in the morning. But these guys had to all be up at 7 o'clock. It's so that made him unpopular. And yes, he did drink a lot when he was doing that stuff. I mean, if you read what's his name? I'm trying to remember what his name is now. The Alan Brooke diaries, who was the chief of the Imperial General Staff in World War II. He spends most of World War II arguing Churchill out stupid, idiotic military plans that would just get British soldiers killed for no purpose. Because Churchill wasn't very good at that stuff. Like he engineered himself many British naval disasters.
Yeah.
He was not good at that stuff. His military. Don't get me wrong.
Didn't he butt heads with the admirals though, like a lot?
Well, he butted heads with sensible admirals because sensible admirals knew about what the Navy could and couldn't do, and Churchill didn't. I mean, Churchill's military experience was commanding like 30 cavalry soldiers.
Yeah,
that's the most he ever did.
Yeah,
and don't get me wrong, he was a brave soldier, certainly. But his military experience was a troop commander in the cavalry. And the British Army,
brave soldiers were a dime a dozen back then, so I don't think that alone is particularly special.
You were expected to be brave to be
a
British
harsh,
officer.
Yeah.
No, to be a British officer, you were expected to be brave, or you'd get pushed out pretty damn quick. But on the other hand, the British Army used to have a saying about the cavalry officer who was so stupid that even other cavalry officers noticed. But I don't think Churchill was stupid by any means, but he was not strategically clever. He made many errors.
Yeah. T said Burnham was arguably anti-British too. He is a bit in places, and that's always kind of annoyed me because I actually do really like him. I like his writing. I find that his sort of dissection of the sort of upending of power in the West is particularly good. And yeah, it's just a bit of a shame. I'll often actually try to point people to Hitchens instead of Burnham. I know it's not strictly the same writing, but like Abolition of Britain hits on a lot of the same points that he makes, but from a sort of different perspective, from a British perspective.
Yeah. I agree. Cotterman, I've read Buchanan's book. There are better books written by British historians, such as The Last 1,000 Days of the British Empire. I like The Last 1,000 Days of the British Empire. It's a good book. I recommend it. It doesn't cover the same scope as Buchanan's book does. And where Buchanan is anti-British, he's anti-British about some of the stupid things that Churchill and later Churchill's protege, Eden did. He's not anti-British about the British when they still had their empire. And actually, a lot of Buchanan's book is talking about how it was bad that the British Empire was destroyed by stupid British decisions. So, yeah. Churchill was responsible for the Norway fiasco. He was. And also the Dardanelles fiasco, for Craddock being killed in the South Atlantic in 1914. For Force Z that was destroyed in the opening of the war against Japan in 1942, late 1941, all of that stuff, and even really ultimately for the failure of the defense of Malaya. That was Churchill's fault, and in two ways. He didn't send them anything when he could have, because he was sending everything he could to Russia. much of which was left to rot in Vladivostok, because the Russians didn't actually like some of this British stuff, including like modern Hurricane and Spitfires even. Hurricanes and Spitfires were just left to rot in Vladivostok, not sent to, British forces in the Far East. Good day, Rupert. How are you going?
Hello. Much fatigued by British public transport.
Yeah, I can well believe it, man. I'll just finish this point and then you can come in. Churchill also, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, skimped on the defences of Singapore. Because when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, all he was constantly trying to do was to cut British defence expenditure. And Churchill was one of the main people who supported the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule, for anyone who doesn't know, was in the 1920s. Britain had a rule there won't be a major war for 10 years, which was okay in the early 1920s. But the trouble was it was extended every year. So basically, there was never going to be a war for 10 years. And that Churchill was a huge supporter of that. So he was a bit of a hypocrite as well. Churchill's hatred of the Germans stemmed from his captivity by the Boers. I don't know if that's true, to be honest with you. I mean, for one thing, although there are German bits of the Boers are more Dutch and also Huguenot French than anything else. But yeah.
It was an easy connection to make, though, given the Kaiser's support of the Boers. So the Kruger telegram and all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And actually, Buchanan does quite well in explaining some of that stuff. So yeah, as I say, if I can find a way of getting hold of Horus, I will do a stream of Horus on the unnecessary war, because I think it's actually a pretty damn good book. Theo Rossett, Churchill was a good writer. I'm not going to say he wasn't. I like his early stuff better than his later stuff. Like the story of the Malakand Field Force and the River War and My Early Life are good books and easy to read. But I think some of his later stuff gets a bit more pompous and less easy to read. And also his histories of World War II and stuff are not exactly honest, to be honest. Like he twists things to suit himself quite a lot in his like things like the world crisis and all that kind of stuff. Not always totally reliable by any means. And he did, as No Name said, Churchill did have some seriously psychopathic tendencies. Like he really did like wars, which is strange. And especially, and it's even more strange when you're not actually fighting in them. You're just being a politician in them. And all these poor buggers are getting killed. That's, not very good, really, in my opinion. I mean, that might be a partially generational thing, because obviously Teddy Roosevelt had the same complex, but in both his case and in Churchill's case, I believe as well, right? They both did personally serve, but then continued to advocate for wars that were quite different from what they personally served in. Yeah,
fair enough. That's true. Kahneman in the chat says Buchanan claimed the British Empire was a rival to the United States and the Americans were right to replace it. Not in that book, he does not. No. In fact, the opposite. He says that America was a rival to the British Empire. This is not a matter for debate. This was just a fact. Okay? This was just a fact. And one of America's war aims in World War II, as Buchanan says, was to destroy the British Empire. So I don't see the problem with any of that.
Well, I mean, technically, Britain was a rival power to the United States.
Yes, the British Empire absolutely was a rival to the United States. Yes, it was. The trouble was, as Buchanan points out, that the British upper classes had this misty-eyed idea of some, to use Churchill's phrase, the English-speaking peoples. And the special relationship, which has never existed except in British imagination. It's never been a real thing for most Americans. And in World War II, and Churchill, of course, was particularly vulnerable to this because of his adored American mother. Yeah. He was actually a bit of an upper-class whore, if the truth be known, but there we go.
Well, she was. We get into the Princess Diana posting.
Oh, I mentioned that the other day. We were talking about landmines somewhere, yeah, and of course Britain signed a treaty not to use landmines anymore,
although the government did insert some stuff about we reserve the right to use them in exceptional circumstances, although I will be amazed if Britain still has any. But that was because of that slut, Diana, because she was going around the world crying about landmines, none of which were laid by the British, by the way. I mean, it's like, you know, it's Britain lays a minefield somewhere, they pick them up afterwards, but, you know. So, yeah, I don't know. I will say. What, John McNamara, what do I think of Charles de Gaulle? Why, he was French.
Enough said.
Yes, but that encompasses my opinion about Charles de Gaulle. And if you know my opinion of the French, then you'll know my opinion about Charles de Gaulle.
So, well, he's a failed royalist, for one thing.
Yeah.
He was given the golden opportunity to restore the kingdom, and he never did.
Yeah, that's true. Rupert August, did you have something in particular you would like to bring up?
Yes, there is one thing. I can't help but have had this thought sort of as I was, sitting around in the train station and on the very slow train, which was the only one to get out in about 3 hours, that I was reminded of a point that was made recently, which I thought was quite interesting, where we have this problem in the British state, or like the British establishment in particular, where we have to... I say we as though I'm part of that, where they have to universalize a problem that is very particular because they can't be seen as discriminating. And so apparently what happened was that there were people on the lines today, and it sounds quite similar to a case of suicide prevention that was happening on a particular line going into London, I believe. I can't remember the exact line, but essentially a load of South Asian women were throwing themselves in front of trains for whatever reason. But in order to not discriminate and make it a racial issue, they had to universalize this policy against, like trying to stop this from happening because they couldn't be seen to be discriminating against this one particular group. And I can't help but wonder if the same sort of thing is going to be happening here as well.
Why are they doing this, for God's sake?
I mean, there's probably a load of reasons. Maybe they're in some particularly awful native marriage with their cousin or something who beats them, and obviously the customs of the family don't allow them to do anything about that.
Okay, weird. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if it was that, they would certainly try and cover up.
But I feel like this is quite a widespread problem that we seem to have, whereby, I mean, you see it with the grooming gangs thing as well. You're not allowed to particularize that problem. You have to try to fudge these statistics in a way that makes it so that there isn't an overwhelming ethnic majority, or at least an unacceptable overwhelming ethnic majority. So you change it to be like I don't know, sexual. At the very wide end, you would change it to be sexual assault and say, oh yeah, sexual assault is majority white male. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do about that, bigot?
Yeah, I mean, of course, they had the Guardian headline after the Home Office report was forced to be published, where they just said, "Oh, majority of cases are like white guys, so case closed."
Yeah. Which you see the suspect line up, and you see that there must be some statistics fudging going on there.
Yeah, like country's 80% white, and the lineup is, I think it's like a third white, but this isn't an issue. Clearly.
Well, I mean, we've all probably seen cases which look very like Islamic terrorism, for example, which are actually not called terrorism. The guy's mad. It's an insanity thing.
Oh yeah, they do a lot of the pathologizing stuff as well to cover for that.
I just want to pull this up. Franz says, Duke, did you see the CC live stream with Eddie Butler and Adrian Davis? I didn't, but what's the CC live stream? Because I'll go and watch it if it's still around. So if you're still in the chat, Franz, tell me what the CC live stream is, because I don't know what that is. Lee Ham in the chat, or I think it's a soldier, turned around and said, "We still have bar mines, but we treat them with a command. They use them with a command wire." Okay, fair enough. Which kind of defeats the purpose partly of having mines, but yeah. What was the other thing I wanted to put up? Steve, Roosevelt wanted to weaken the British Empire. Yes, he did, and he actually put it into a lot of the treaties he made Churchill sign. Churchill didn't have any clue about any of this, by the way. Till about 1944, he started to wake up, by which time it was far too late.
Yeah.
Someone's saying in the chat that line, the rail line, goes through a load of places that are full of Asians, like Slough and what have you. And I used to know Slough, not a place I would recommend to anyone, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like the right one.
Slough and Southall, yeah, absolutely, like Asian Central.
Asian
Central, yeah. So, yeah, I could absolutely believe what you're saying there, Rupert, for sure. The landmine treaty was a travesty. Yes, it was. I mean, for a small army like the British Army, fighting a defensive battle, minefields are extremely useful. And Britain doesn't scatter them around willy-nilly and just leave them. Quite a lot of third world nations do. But then why should that make Britain sign an anti-mine treaty?
Mm.
And it was just done on emotion. And as I say, mainly because of that slut Diana going around crying about children all over the place. It had nothing to do with Britain. Maybe she went with her Egyptian shopkeeper lover or one of the others. What are good books to buy for learning about the British Empire and British history in general? Craig, that is such a huge damn question. Like, there are literally probably 10,000 books that you could read about Britain and history and British Empire. It's just too big of a question, mate.
Well, you got that one that we brought up earlier, the last 1,000 days of the British Empire.
Yep, I'd say that's worth reading, but that's about World War II.
Yeah.
As you said, Armin, the Phony Victory by Peter Hitchens, that's worth reading, but that's also World War II. I would suggest Splendid Isolation, British Foreign Policy 1874 to 1914. That's well worth reading.
Neil Ferguson's Empire is okay. It's got a bit of a funny perspective, but
yeah, Ferguson's a bit global homo for my taste, but yeah, all right.
Well, he is, yeah.
But yeah, fair enough. But yeah, there's really loads and loads of stuff. I mean, a lot of the older stuff by Arthur Bryant and stuff I quite like. Before historians were infected with global homo.
Yeah, you'll have to read them as PDF though, because trying to get a good collection of that particular series is quite difficult.
Unless you can get them from like library cast-offs, so loads of libraries are getting rid of them these days because they don't want anything that's based, of course, in the library.
Yeah, even then, I think they threw a lot of them out a long time ago because I've got a bunch of library cast-offs of Arthur Bryant stuff, and even I struggled to get a full collection together. There's still a few missing ones.
But yeah,
I mean, like Unfinished Victory, for example, that particular book, which some people read for a very particular reason. I mean, he bought up all those copies, so that book is, unless you get one in from America, and even then they're quite rare, that book can be quite hard to get hold of.
And expensive, yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But as you said, I mean, you can get a lot of this stuff on PDFs. I do recommend, what's it called? The Zed Library, I think is the site where you can get lots of free PDF books. That's a good site to check out. No, Ferguson doesn't go Empire bad, but he doesn't go Empire good either, really, to be honest. I'm not a Ferguson fan, to be honest. I mean, I don't hate him, but he's not by any means my favourite historian.
I mean, his argument in that book, he doesn't go Empire bad, but his argument is broadly that the Empire was good because it took liberal democracy to the world, which I don't think is a particularly accurate takeaway. But he still does a good brief on certain aspects of British imperial history, and there's a good bibliography as well to break off and go and read other stuff.
There's a weird trilogy of books, and it's especially weird because the bloke who wrote it changed sex. But
Where
they're
you going
actually
with this?
no, they're actually not. This is the ridiculous thing. They're actually quite good books, but the bloke became a trans person. So that for me is like the end of my liking for those books. But the books themselves are not terrible. Jan Morris, I think the name.
Right.
Although originally it was James Morris, but then they changed later. Quite late in life, like he'd had kids and all sorts of shit. It's really, really strange. But
Cardamon said, "A History of English-Speaking Peoples" by Winston Churchill. I've heard really good things about that, but I haven't picked it up.
Yeah, he's all right. I don't. But he's got very long-winded by the time he wrote that. To be honest,
He's a good writer, though, usually.
Yeah, he is. He is. Listen, if you talk about his early books, like the story of the Malacan Field Force and the River War, I really like those books. They're great. And even My Early Life, which is a bit later, was written in the early 30s. I think that's a good book. It's quite a
I
small
quite
book
like.
as well.
It's a bit more broad, but I quite like that Robert Toombs, The English and Their History.
Yep. Yeah.
But that isn't just the Empire, though. He kind of goes through everything.
Yeah, it's just such a big subject with so many books written about it. I mean, I just reading about British Army in the 19th century, I've probably read, I don't know, 1,500 books or more just about the British Army in the 19th century.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a good question to maybe tabulate some proper reading material on, because, I mean, I haven't read enough about it myself. Definitely not enough.
Yeah. I mean, but like I said, it's just such. I mean, the same thing goes for the Royal Navy. If you were to put up books about the Royal Navy from, say Queen Elizabeth the time to today, there are literally thousands.
Yeah, but I'm sure you must
some
be
of
able
those,
to
some of
draw
those are
out like a
really
personal
hard to get.
favourite. I'm sure you must be able to put together like a personal favourite on each of the major, both aspects and eras.
Yeah, I suppose that's something we could think about doing, is doing a reading this. But if I do it, I'll do it with the Discord, so you guys can have an input to it.
Mm.
But yeah, if we do, I might even do that as a project for the Discord. People putting forward 10 books on this, that, or the other.
Yeah,
that might be worth doing. But yeah, that would certainly be interesting, I think. Did you have anything else you would like to bring up, Rupert? Because you joined us a bit later.
It's pretty much the same point I brought up last time, but it's an ongoing sort of developing story that's quite interesting and might be quite significant. Is the economic implications of the Russo-Ukrainian war, given that the ruble has now managed to regain much of its value since the start of the war, and I'm still unsure. Like, I'm still a little fuzzy on the details. But the fact that it seems to be in some sense pegged to gold is quite a significant development, potentially for future monetary policy happenings, and as a good case study as to how that goes. Because for a long time we've been in an environment where everything is fiat, so potentially to get a single commodity currency back, albeit with some like political implications of owning it, that might be quite a significant movement that will affect the international monetary policy and environment quite significantly, just to see how that goes.
Yeah,
I mean, we briefly touched on this a little earlier.
We did.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's kind of, they've kind of put themselves in a bit of a shite position now, because they've already labelled him as literally Hitler. He's Putler Supreme. So, the idea that they can now try and, I suppose they've cut off any options they had of putting any pressure on him to stop this from happening. I suppose, I mean, what are they going to do from now? Just try to cut off any supply of gold going into Russia, or Russians buying gold abroad, or...
Well, good luck doing that, because China's got most of it.
Yeah. So
and both Russia and China are also still mining gold as well.
Yep.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But,
and the gold that they own isn't paper gold either. They actually have gold stocks. Yeah. They've been planning for this Russia in particular has been planning for this for 8 years. And obviously, in retrospect, we could say that maybe assuming that the Western powers wouldn't just freak out and confiscate assets was maybe not the best assumption. But I mean, considering the cost, it seems to be set to give Russia quite the windfall.
Yeah.
You know, $200 billion in exchange for bringing down American economic hegemony. That's a pretty good deal for Russia.
I've seen people suggesting that like China might follow suit.
As in with a commodity currency.
Yeah, we're like pegging their currency to gold because they've also got pretty good big gold reserves.
It would be harder for China to do it, wouldn't they? Because of the scope of their fiat currency they have currently.
Well, they don't even have one fiat currency, as I understand at the moment. They have multiple. They have like a domestic currency and a foreign currency.
I was just going to say, there's a currency they use overseas, and then there's an internal one, isn't there?
Isn't that just isn't that just the historical norm for China? I mean, they used to have a governing currency of silver, and then a sort of a local currency for the plebs.
Yeah, I think it's just generally that they want more control over internal monetary policy, or like internal outcomes that they can, use monetary policy to achieve than commodity currency would allow.
It would also mean, like, if your currency, well, I mean, as we were talking about earlier before you came on, Rupert, the Russians haven't actually gone back onto the gold standard. They're working towards it, though. And if China were to follow suit, and that's going to certainly, India will join that, I would imagine, as well. And maybe some other upcoming and getting richer and more advanced Asian nations. That's going to cause real problems for the Americans, and it would make sanctions almost not work. Like it would be impossible to put sanctions on a country which had gold standard. It wouldn't be possible to do, really.
Yeah,
well, they could still just sort of cut down on all trade and continue with the de facto blockade that they've already got. But they're no longer doing so from the perspective of a power which has certain monopolies in various different core financial areas.
Yeah, but what tends to happen with sanctions, and why they used to work sometimes, or to some degree anyway, was that the locals of those countries that were sanctioned would then buy dollars, or sometimes pounds or euros or whatever, but mostly dollars. And what the Russians have very cleverly done is make sure that the Russians won't do that now. And if
all the payment processes, I don't know how they expected that to happen if that was indeed the plan. Because what my assumption was that it would be a de facto blockade, and they would just try to shut down as many economic levers as they could in the internal Russian economy, and through doing that, they would cause enough discomfort that it would make Russia's situation untenable, both from an actual resourcing perspective, but also from a public support perspective.
But it was also pointed out to me by an American, by the way, that the people who previously had wanted to talk about getting rid of the dollar as the reserve currency and going on to some sort of gold standard were Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, both of whom, of course, ended up dead quite quickly after they were talking about this. So. And what's happened in other places where they put sanctions, what's that Central American socialist shidduch? The Americans put sanctions on that place, and what's happened there is that the richer locals have put their money into dollars. And of course, that's not going to happen in Russia now. And you can bet your bottom dollar that China, who is very friendly with Russia these days, partly because, the West has given Russia no choice but to be friendly with China, really. And India is going along with those guys because they buy probably 85% of their military stuff from Russia, for example. And also, if they're in some sort of an alliance, that the China-Indian border disputes are probably going to end. And, I don't know what proportion of the population China, India, and Russia is together of the world, but it's a lot. Like, it's vastly bigger than the whole of the population of Europe, for example. It's vastly bigger than the US population. So, I don't know if I think that the Western nations might have made a very, very big mistake.
I mean, there's another component as well, which is the qualitative side of the sanctions, which a few different people have pointed out now, which is that the people, so I've heard, who are being most severely affected by the sanctions are the oligarchs, who were, one of the only real checks on Putin's power. Anyway,
I love how we call them. I love how we call them oligarchs.
Well, yeah,
people like the guy who runs Amazon or the guy who runs Windows, etc. They're not oligarchs,
Yeah, I mean, from my part, elites or aristocrats works just as well. Obviously, aristocrat has more of a positive connotation though usually, but the principle's the same.
The super rich,
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I think they've cut off their nose to spite their face. I mean, like a lot of these so-called oligarchs, what they've learned is it's not safe to keep any of their money in dollars, basically.
Yeah, which is going to be a huge windfall for Russia in the future potentially if they do get their money back, and if they don't, then it's just a massive transfer of power to Putin himself, basically, because he's been able to take over national ownership, nationalizing basically various assets that were inside the country, and so he can dole them out as he wants to supporters and whatever, and so he's just massively increased his own power for something that was inflicted on him anyway.
Yeah, and as you rightly said, and as we pointed out before you were on here, Rupert, the ruble, which did do a nosedive after the initial sanctions, is now back up to where it was before the war started, and seems to be holding quite steady. And someone in the chat even said that the Russian stock market's doing fine.
Oh, can you imagine the irony?
Yeah. And I mean, also, you've got like Germany, for example, which I think gets something like 35 or 40% of its energy requirements from Russian natural gas.
Yep. And
they simply cannot afford not to use that, because if they do, half the German population will freeze next winter.
Well, actually, they've already started announcing contingency plans and how this is all going to work out in the event of shortage, which implies that they are expecting shortage, which is that they will prioritize, heating of homes and the domestic usage of what energy reserves they have.
And so they've already done it. They've already done it, Rupert. I was watching a stream. I think it was another Radlib stream, actually. Radlib does some pretty good streams on economy and economics and so on. And he was saying, or rather his guest was saying, that like the Volkswagen plant in Germany was shut down for like 2 weeks because they just couldn't provide it with enough power.
So in absolute terms, I don't think they're at that point yet. So that might have been on request, because they do still have months worth of stockpiles essentially to be able to power.
But they were absolutely saying to big industrial companies, no, you can't operate. We haven't got enough power, or we're trying to save it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's more the latter, that they're trying to save.
Yeah.
But
they also had this problem in China too, though.
Yes, they did. But I mean, same principle really, and essentially they couldn't get access to the coal that they needed.
Yeah. And I mean, and Germany is even more insane on this watermelon green shit than Britain is. So,
we'll see. I
mean, look, I just can't believe that the British leadership hasn't turned around and said, okay, sorry guys, we just can't do this crap. I mean, their latest thing they were talking about was covering enormous amounts of fields in the UK with solar panels. Like, because Britain's so well known for its sunshine. But, they're definitely going to be useful in the winter. They're not just going to... And, of course, this is land that you can't grow crops on, obviously. It's going to be yet another eyesore in the British countryside, which is increasingly an eyesore because of the windmills and all the other shit that they keep putting up and building everywhere. I don't know, man. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, people use solar panels where I live, and like where I live in Victoria, this has got one of the worst climates in Australia, but we still get quite a lot of sunshine even in winter. But it's not great compared with, say, Queensland or even New South Wales. But in the UK.
I have
Vast
solar
fields of
panels.
solar panels.
I think they're good on an individual basis. I mean, I've got 6, so I've only got a small amount. And yeah, I get a nice. I mean, I basically get free electricity during the daytime hours in the summer, and then in the winter it's just a small, substitute. Just a small little boost.
But it's not a substitute for power stations or
I mean, I'm quite the environmentalist anyway. I mean, if I could get the sort of property I wanted, I'd have one of these little mini wind turbines, and that would probably power most of my energy needs anyway. But yeah, it's something that has to work alongside, your gas, your oil.
yeah,
Your
it's a money saver for an individual for sure. Eventually, once you've paid the initial cost of getting it, of course. But like the idea of covering hundreds and hundreds of acres, and they're talking about doing it in the south of England, by the way, because that gets more sunshine. It's just a fucking stupid idea.
And of course, the thing is, because I saw an article recently where they came out, they were attacking Farage for being a Putin apologist, because of course they always get that one line that he said when he said Putin was a modern leader he admired, or something along those lines. I mean, they ignore the fact that Farage also predicted, the sort of thing that's come to pass between Russia and Ukraine, based on how America's been acting, and they completely sweep that under the rug. And it's just kind of but they will never talk about the funding of like the green lobby by Russia, or the funding of the anti-nuclear lobby by Russia, because that would be attacking the streams of foreign revenue that they receive.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, I've got no room for the green people anyway. I mean, I don't care where their funding comes from. I think they're insane. I don't know how to describe them. I probably can't on this stream. But I've got no room for them at all. Steve makes the good point that can Europe even import enough natural gas via ship? They probably can't, actually, because to import natural gas, the ships are very specialized, and you also have to have very specialized ports, which the Greens, in inverted commas, because they're really like red on the inside and green on the outside, constantly don't want anyone to put up a port like that.
So I believe also you need to be able to refine the liquid natural gas back into its gaseous usable form, because you can't just put liquid natural gas into a power plant. You need to get it back into its gaseous form first, and so basically at every step of the process of changing the method of importing gas from, say, a pipeline to liquid natural gas via sea, like at every step there's a road bump that needs to be overcome, basically,
and obviously an increased cost as well.
Probably
there's going to be an increased cost because of the transport, and as you say, the specialized port facilities and all the rest of it that you need for it. So you that's going to be more expensive, even if you could do it, and there are enough ships capable of moving natural gas to actually do it, which I doubt somewhat sometimes. And I know moving it by ship is a very expensive way of doing it.
I know pipeline is definitely the best way of going about it, if possible. If you're not pulling it out the ground right next to where you need it. But I think the bigger increase in price is probably going to come from the just increase in not demand, but the reduction in supply, essentially, with a maintained demand, because that's going to necessitate that some portion of the world stops or cuts back its use of gas in order to account for the newly reduced quantity available. So
that makes sense. I mean, look, I like I said, I think everything is going up in price a lot more than people realize. It's going to happen much more quickly than people realize it's going to happen. And I really think there's going to be a situation in countries like Britain where you get a cold winter, that you're going to have old age pensioners dying every winter because they're making the choice whether to eat or heat their homes.
Potentially, yeah. But I think Britain won't be too bad compared to the places that are a little bit more on the edge on a mass scale. So, places that can't necessarily stomach or literally cannot afford a like, I don't know, let's say 50% increase in wheat cost. Those are the places.
For sure. Egypt and places like that are going to suffer more. But I'm like I said, I don't know if you were wrong when I said this, Rupert, but I reckon you're going to see like 20% inflation rates in places like UK and the USA, and sooner than people think. And I think that, combined with all the other stuff, is going to make a perfect inflationary storm. And I just think like lifestyles in Western nations are going to have to change vastly more than people realize at the moment, for the worse. And, I reckon our elite leaders don't care about that, to be honest.
That's I suppose, the brutal truth of it.
Yeah, I don't think they do. I think they want us to be 21st century serfs.
I think it really depends on the elite, because, for example, the fact that the government are so perpetually petrified of a reduction in house prices, and they just have to keep throwing more petrol on that fire to make sure that house prices continually go up for the sake of making people feel more prosperous. I think that's an indication that they are quite worried about the prospect of people getting poorer in real terms, because it will fall on them.
Yeah, and it's going to affect what's left of the middle class in the UK, particularly.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, all right, it's going to cause real hardship to the poor, including people who are existing on state pensions. But who it's really going to smash in the teeth is the middle class.
Well,
because they're going to lose their savings. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's already happened anyway. But I think this is what I was saying earlier. That I think a large part of how they've convinced people to just roll over and accept huge amounts of social change was off the back of the idea that it was necessary for the prosperity that we enjoy. And I think, at some point in the future, people are going to learn very quickly that the two were never really linked. The social changes was, the demographic changes, the progressive ideals, that was just
700,000 immigrants a year.
I mean, I think it's actually it's hit very close to a million, hasn't it? At one point in the last couple of years.
Man,
I think during that first year of lockdown. I mean, admittedly, that's not net, but I think I
was going to say, yeah.
I'm pretty sure the net figure is a bit of a con anyway, though, because you're looking at English people who are becoming expats to places like Australia and New Zealand. And
traditionally,
yeah.
Well, sorry, I was going to say traditionally, yes, but there's in more recent years, there's a lot of cases of Eastern Europeans, for example, going home. I mean, potentially other minorities. I can kind of see it if they're looking at a long lockdown potentially, then they don't want to spend it in a foreign country where they can't work anyway, if that's the whole reason that they're there in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, if I was a Pole or Hungarian, I'd certainly go home from the UK at the moment, to be honest with you. But there again, I don't know. I have one final topic, gents, that I thought I'd bring up. It's a bit more. It's not as serious as some of the other stuff, although in some ways it is. What's his name? Gareth Southgate, the England football team manager, and I say England in inverted commas, of course. He was shoving his oar in about Qatar and the World Cup and stuff. And he was talking about their treatment of immigrants and gays and women. Why was the, in inverted commas, England football manager, soccer manager for anyone who's in the chat who isn't British, why was the England football manager opening his gob about that stuff? What's it got to do with football?
Well, because friend enemy. I mean, even every sport needs to be politicised as well. Every club, every outlet.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, chaps, what you thought with that European Cup final where he got all the black guys to take the penalties and they all missed. I'm of the opinion he did that on purpose because he wanted to show how diverse England was. He thought he was going to go home saying, "Look at how wonderful."
Oh yeah, but that's 100% what it was.
Yeah, because I've had people telling me, "Nah, it wasn't that. It was just that they were the players who would do it." You know.
Well, no, because there were other players afterwards who came forward and said that they'd offered to do it, and they'd said no. Even players that were more experienced at penalty kickoffs. So I'm going to sound like I'm someone that actually watches football here. I have no idea how this stuff works.
I'm not, by the way. I've never been a football fan. I was an enormous cricket and rugby union fan when I was younger, but I don't even watch those anymore. But yeah, but I was in a discussion with a bloke last week about this, and he was saying, no, Southgate would never ever let politics interfere with football. And then I saw Nigel Farage of all people defending Southgate. Don't know why. Because I don't know about you guys, I don't actually believe in human rights as such. I don't think there are human rights. I think that there are rights that people get in various countries. And I also think that Britain, for example, treats its immigrants and gays and women too well, in the sense that they give them unfair advantages over other people, which shouldn't happen, in my opinion. So, I don't care what Qatar does. I'm not a Qatari. I don't care. So why did Gavin Southgate open his gob about this if he's not really a lefty liberal, which he does seem to be?
I mean, everyone is. What's the conquest law that every institution will drift leftwards over time? That if it's not explicitly right wing. But I do also think what did immediately come to mind was the ability to drum up a kind of faux patriotism, and in the fact of being allowed to dislike or hate or be chauvinistic about another country, or against another country, but about completely asinine things that are actually perhaps harmful or just not important in the grand scheme of things.
Two of the most popular streams on this channel were why you shouldn't support the England team that I did, and I did them at the time when all of the England team except for one single player, and honour him, and I think he was an Irish descent bloke actually. Only one England player was not kneeling to Black Lives Matter. And as far as I was concerned, as soon as I saw 10 out of 11 England players kneeling to Black Lives Matter, and if the black guys had done it, I wouldn't have given a shit. It was the white guys. I don't think the England team should be full of black guys anyway, but it's just me. I'm racist and what have you. As soon as the England team did that, which made me sick to my stomach, I couldn't support them anymore. And so I did two streams about that, and they're two of the most popular streams on the whole channel. But last week I was talking to this dude who's a football nut. He likes football. And he was trying to tell me that there's no way that Southgate would have done anything like that. As soon as the whistle blows, there's no politics in football. And I thought it was shit. And someone else on the Discord also thought it was shit. So, but I think this week with Southgate saying that has proven it. And like I said, I have no idea why Nigel Farage was supporting Southgate. I would have ignored it if I'd have been Farage, frankly.
Well, I mean, Farage is a boomer. He's occasionally going to attach himself to some dumb stuff.
Yeah, true enough. Any final points to bring up from either of you two gents? Anything you want to shill or what have you?
No, nothing springs to mind on my end.
No, I'm good.
All right, nice to have you back, Adam. Thank you for coming on, Rupert, and I hope you recover from your yucky journey.
Yeah.
And as always, I will play us out with a bit of a tune. Where are we? Sorry, I'll get this to work in a sec. Forgive me. What was going on there? Okay, try again.
Soldiers with swords in hands to the walls coming, horsemen about the street riding and running, sentinels on the walls, armor crying, petards against the porch while fire flying. When cannons are roaring and bullets are flying, he that would honor win must not fear dying.
Trumpets on turrets high, they are a-sounding, drums beating out aloud, echoes resounding, alarm bells in each place, they are a-ringing, women with stones in laps to the walls bringing.
When cannons are roaring and bullets are flying, he that would honor win must not fear dying. Captains in open fields on their foes rushing, gentlemen second them with their pikes pushing. Engineers in the trench, earth uprearing, gunpowder in the mines, pagans are blowing. When cannons are roaring and bullets are flying, he that would honor win must not fear dying.
Okay, and that's a song that was popular in the English Civil War that was written in the 1620s. And from an excellent channel, Patriotic Archive, which I often play music from. Do go and subscribe to him. Thanks for joining us, folks. Thank you to my guests, Armin and Rupert August.
Yeah,
And I will put links to anything they want in the description at some point later on today. Go well, and we will see you certainly next Saturday, but possibly before that, because I want to try and do an Old Commonwealth stream next week if I can organise it with Australians and Canadians, etc. So go well.
Good night, all.